She kissed him. Not gently, not accidentally. She grabbed his collar with both hands, pulled him close, and pressed her lips against his, like she was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping her above water. Daniel Carter didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then he stepped back. And the hidden camera in the corner of his living room captured every single frame. By morning, that footage would be in the hands of the most dangerous man in the company. By noon, Victoria Sinclair's empire would begin to crack. And by the end of the week, both of them would realize this was never an accident. Drop a comment with your city. Let me know how far this story has traveled. And if you're watching this for the first time, hit that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. The rain had been falling since 8 o'clock that evening, the kind of cold, relentless rain that makes a man want to lock his door, turn off his phone, and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. Daniel Carter had almost done exactly that. He'd put Ethan to bed at 9:15, checked the locks twice the way he always did, poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. He didn't finish and stretched out on the couch with a book he hadn't opened in 3 weeks. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel like loneliness, and now, after 7 years of raising a son alone, had started to feel like peace. His phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. He almost didn't look at it, but something made him reach over, some instinct he couldn't name. Maybe it was the military in him, 12 years in the army, teaching a man that the calls that come after midnight are never the ones you want to ignore. He looked at the screen. Victoria Sinclair calling. Daniel sat up. In 4 years of working under Victoria Sinclair, she had never once called him after business hours. Not when the Meridian Tower deal collapsed. Not when the board went to war over the Henderson acquisition. Not even the night the company's CFO had a heart attack in the middle of a shareholder presentation. Victoria Sinclair did not make personal calls. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Sinclair. Silence. Then breathing. Shallow, uneven breathing. Daniel. Her voice was wrong. It was low, jagged at the edges, like she was trying to hold something together with both hands and losing. I need you to listen to me very carefully. He was already standing. I'm listening. I need you to come get me, but I need you to come alone. A pause. Do not call anyone from the executive team. Do you understand me? Not the board. Not security. Not Marcus. Marcus. Her business partner. The man she'd built the company with 15 years ago. Tell me where you are, Daniel said. He was already moving toward his jacket. The Ashford Club, on Renfield. Another pause, longer this time. I'm outside. I didn't want to go back inside. Something isn't right, Daniel. Something is very wrong, and I don't know who to trust right now, and She stopped. He heard her breath catch. Victoria Sinclair did not catch her breath. He had sat in rooms with her when deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars were collapsing in real time, and the woman had never once lost her composure. She could silence a boardroom with a single look. She had made grown men twice her age walk out of meetings shaking. She did not sound like that woman right now. She sounded frightened. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said. Daniel. The way she said his name, not his title, not Carter, not his last name, the way she used in meetings, his name, just his name, like she was holding on to it. Please don't tell anyone. I won't, he said. I'm coming. He checked on Ethan before he left. His son was 8 years old, dark-haired, sleeping on his stomach the way he always did, one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. He left the nightlight on. He left his neighbor's number on the kitchen counter, with a note just in case. He had done this before, not often, but sometimes the job required it. Emergencies happened. He just had never expected an emergency that sounded like this. Choy. The Ashford Club was the kind of place that didn't advertise. No sign above the door. No listing on any public directory. You either knew where it was or you didn't belong there. It was a membership-only social club for the city's wealthiest investors, the kind of place where deals that moved markets got made over scotch, that cost more per glass than most people's car payments. Victoria had been there for a private investor dinner. He knew that much. She'd mentioned it briefly in their Thursday briefing, the way she always mentioned her evening obligations tersely, as if she was logging an appointment, rather than sharing a detail of her life. He found her on the side of the building, standing under a narrow overhang, away from the valets and the cameras and the attendants in their black coats. She was wearing a charcoal evening dress that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, and she looked completely, utterly out of place with herself. That was the only way he could describe it. Victoria Sinclair always looked like she belonged exactly where she was. She carried authority the way other people carried a coat naturally, without thinking about it, like it had always been there. Right now, she looked like she'd lost something she couldn't find. Ms. Sinclair. She looked up when she heard him. Something moved through her expression, relief maybe, or something close to it. Then immediately, the way he'd seen her do 100 times in meetings, she pulled her composure back. Straightened, lifted her chin. "I'm fine," she said. "I want you to know that I'm aware of how this looks." Daniel looked at her steadily. Her eyes weren't quite tracking right. Not dramatically, she wasn't stumbling, she wasn't slurring. But he'd spent years learning to read people in situations where reading them wrong could get someone killed. There was something slightly disconnected about her, a softness around the eyes that wasn't natural. "How many drinks did you have tonight?" he asked. She frowned, not annoyed, genuinely uncertain. "1, maybe 1.5. I barely touched the second glass." She shook her head slightly, like she was trying to clear it. "I know what intoxication feels like, Daniel. This is not that. Something else is happening. I felt it an hour into the dinner, a kind of heaviness. And then I couldn't focus. I kept losing the thread of conversations." Daniel said nothing. He was watching her carefully. "I excused myself to the restroom, and I called you," she said, "because I couldn't go back in there." She paused. "I don't trust what was in that room." He made a decision. "Okay," he said. "You're coming with me." She looked at him. "I have a driver." "Your driver works for the company," Daniel said. "Come with me." She held his gaze for a moment. In the dim light for just a second, she looked tired in a way he'd never seen before. Not sleepy. Tired the way people get when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "All right," she said. She was quiet in the car. "Bah." He drove without the radio. The rain hammered the windshield. He kept checking her in the peripheral. Her head was leaned back against the seat, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling like she was trying to stay awake through sheer determination. "Who else was at the dinner?" he asked. 8 investors, she said. Arthur Klein. The 2 Singapore partners, Leong and Tan. Hargrove, Morrison. She paused. Marcus. Marcus was there. He organized it. A long silence. He invited a new investor, a man named Reeves, Warren Reeves, private equity. He's been circling the company for the past 18 months wanting a board seat. She closed her eyes briefly. "I've been blocking it." Daniel kept driving. "How did the dinner end?" he asked. I don't entirely remember." Her voice shifted, and for the first time he heard something that sounded like fear underneath it. Not the performance of fear. Real fear. "I remember the main course. I remember Arthur telling a story about Hong Kong. And then the next thing I'm certain of is standing outside by myself, not knowing how long I'd been there." "You're missing time." "Yes." Very quietly. "Yes, I am." He pulled off the expressway and onto the surface streets that led back toward his neighborhood. He didn't ask permission. He didn't offer alternatives. He made a decision the way he'd learned to make decisions quickly and without second-guessing himself. "I'm taking you to my house," he said. "My son is there, but he's asleep. You can get cleaned up. Drink some water, sit somewhere safe until you feel right. She looked at him. Daniel, if you want me to call someone, tell me who, but you told me not to call anyone from the executive team. That's half my contact list, and I'm not leaving you alone right now. He glanced at her briefly. So tell me what you want. She turned back toward the windshield. Your house is fine, she said. He had a modest house. 3 bedrooms, a backyard Ethan used for everything from baseball to what he called scientific experiments. A kitchen that always had slightly too many dishes in the drying rack. It was a real house, a lived-in house, a house that smelled like someone's life. Victoria stood in the entryway and looked at it like she'd forgotten what a home was supposed to look like. Sit down, he said, nodding toward the living room. I'll get you water. She sat on the couch, not perched on the edge the way he might have expected. She sat back into it like her bones were suddenly heavier than they'd been a minute ago. He brought her water, then coffee, then a blanket. She didn't ask for that. He draped over the arm of the couch without comment. He sat in the chair across from her and said nothing, because he'd learned a long time ago that silence was sometimes the most useful thing you could offer a person. She drank the water. She set the glass down. And then slowly, like a wall that had been standing for years and was now very quietly beginning to give Victoria Sinclair, started to talk. Not about the dinner, not about the investors or the company or the missing memory. She talked about the 15 years she'd spent building Sinclair Group from a 2-person operation in a rented office space to a corporation with assets in 8 countries. She talked about the board meetings where she'd had to be twice as prepared as every man in the room just to be taken half as seriously. She talked about the deals she'd won and the ones she'd lost, and the particular loneliness of success when there's no one at home to tell about it. She had never spoken to him like this, not in 4 years. He'd seen glimpses, moments where something human flickered behind the armor, but she'd always pulled it back. Tonight, the armor was gone. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer perspective or analysis or advice. He just listened the way someone listens when they understand that a person doesn't always need answers. They need to be heard. At some point, the coffee got cold. At some point, she stopped talking. The room was very quiet. The rain outside had slowed to something gentler. The clock above the fireplace said 1:23 a.m. Daniel wasn't entirely sure afterward what happened or precisely how it started. She had looked at him, really looked at him in the way people rarely look at each other, and said something he would turn over in his mind many times in the weeks that followed. You're a good man, Daniel Carter. You know that, a genuinely good man. They're rarer than people think. And then she leaned forward. He didn't move. He didn't know later whether he had been too surprised to react or whether some part of him, some complicated human part that 4 years of professional distance hadn't entirely extinguished, had simply waited 1 second too long. She kissed him. Not tentatively, not accidentally. She reached up and took his collar in both hands and kissed him like it was the first honest thing she'd done in years. For 3 seconds, the world stopped. Then Daniel put his hands gently on her shoulders and eased back. Victoria. His voice was steady, though his pulse was not. Stop. She blinked. Something came back into her eyes, awareness, then clarity, then something close to horror. Daniel, She released his collar, pulled back. Her hands went to her face briefly. She exhaled. I apologize. I don't know what. It's all right, he said. It's not all right. Her voice was sharp with self-reproach. It's completely inappropriate and... You're not yourself tonight, he said. Something happened at that dinner. We don't know what yet, but you're safe here. And nothing. He made sure she heard the weight in the word. Nothing happened. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said softly. Neither of them noticed the small green light in the corner of the room. The light that meant the security camera his building management company had installed 3 months ago and that he had completely forgotten was recording. And had been recording. All night. He set her up in the guest room, gave her an old t-shirt of his that was 3 sizes too big, said goodnight in the hallway the way you'd say goodnight to a colleague stranded by weather. He went to his own room. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about the way she'd said his name on the phone, the fear underneath the control, the gaps in her memory, Marcus's name coming up twice both times with something underneath her voice he couldn't quite read. He thought about what she'd said. Something is very wrong, and I don't know who to trust. He knew that feeling. He knew it from the desert, from missions that had turned sideways in ways nobody had planned for, from the particular sensation of understanding that the situation you were standing in was more dangerous than it looked. He lay in the dark. And somewhere across the city, a man he didn't yet know sat in front of a laptop and watched the footage from a security camera in a house on Millbrook Drive and smiled. By morning, everything would change. At 6:14 a.m., before Victoria was awake, and before Ethan came downstairs, Daniel stood in his kitchen with his second cup of coffee and looked out at his backyard. The rain had stopped. The morning was very still. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. No text. Just a photo. It showed his front door taken from somewhere across the street. Victoria Sinclair walking through it. Timestamp 12:09 a.m. Daniel set down his coffee cup. Beer. He understood in that moment with a soldier's cold clarity that whatever had happened last night, whatever had been done to her, whatever had been set in motion, it had not been an accident, and it had not ended. It had just begun. He stared at that photo for 47 seconds. He counted. Old habit from the military: when something hits you hard, you give yourself 60 seconds to feel it, then you move. He didn't use all 60. He set the phone face down on the counter, picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and started thinking. Someone had been outside his house last night, not passing by, not a neighbor. Someone who had been watching, waiting with a camera or a phone, positioned to capture the exact moment Victoria Sinclair walked through his front door. That meant they had known she was coming here before she arrived, which meant they had either tracked her or they had known where she would end up. And the only people who could have known that were the people who had set everything in motion to begin with. His phone buzzed again. Different number, same kind of photo. This one showed Victoria getting into his car outside the Ashford Club. Timestamp 11:59 p.m. Daniel put the phone in his pocket and walked upstairs. He knocked once on the guest room door quietly so Ethan wouldn't wake. Ms. Sinclair. He kept his voice low. I need you to wake up. We have a problem. 30 seconds of silence. Then the door opened. She looked nothing like the CEO he had spent 4 years working under. Hair down. His old gray t-shirt hanging to her thighs. Eyes that had been awake for at least 20 minutes before he knocked. He could tell she had that look of someone who had spent the early morning hours staring at the ceiling rather than sleeping through it. Tell me, she said. He showed her the photos. He showed. She looked at the first one, then the second. Her expression didn't collapse. It went the opposite direction. It got very still, very controlled, the way a person gets when they understand that the situation is serious enough that falling apart is a luxury they can't afford. Someone followed me, she said. Someone was already waiting, Daniel said. Look at the angle on the second photo. That position is across the street and slightly elevated. A car window, maybe a second floor. They were staged before we pulled up. She looked at him. You think this was planned? I think someone knew exactly where you were going before you did, he said, which means they knew you were going to call me, or they made sure you would. That landed. He watched it land, watched something shift behind her eyes. My drink, she said, quietly, not a question. I think so, Daniel said. She was silent for a moment. Then she handed his phone back to him, straightened her spine and said, I need to borrow your phone charger, and I need coffee, and then I need you to tell me everything you know about Warren Reeves. He almost smiled. There she was. They were at the kitchen table with coffee and his laptop when Ethan came downstairs at 7:15, still in his pajamas, hair standing in 4 directions, carrying the stuffed dog he would never admit to still sleeping with. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and stared at Victoria Sinclair with the unguarded direct curiosity that only 8-year-olds can deploy without social consequence. Who are you? He said. Victoria looked at the boy. Something moved across her face, something quick and unguarded gone before it could be named. My name is Victoria, she said. Ethan considered this. Why are you wearing my dad's shirt? Ethan, Daniel said. It's a fair question, Victoria said, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way Daniel had never seen in 4 years of board meetings. My clothes got wet in the rain last night. Your father was kind enough to let me borrow something dry. Ethan nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer in the way that children are satisfied when adults give them the straightforward truth. He climbed into his chair, pulled the cereal box toward him and said, Do you like dinosaurs? I know very little about them, Victoria said. I can fix that, Ethan said with complete confidence. Daniel watched Victoria Sinclair listen to his 8-year-old son explain the difference between a Spinosaurus and a T-Rex with the same focused attention she brought to earnings reports. She asked questions, real questions, not polite adult questions. She leaned forward slightly. She looked at the picture Ethan pulled up on his tablet and said, Wait, so the Spinosaurus was actually bigger, with what appeared to be genuine surprise. Ethan beamed. Daniel felt something happen in his chest that he told himself he was not going to examine right now. His phone rang. Unknown number different from the 2 that had sent the photos. He answered it and walked into the hallway. Mr. Carter. Male voice. Smooth, deliberate, the kind of voice that had practiced sounding calm. I think you're aware by now that we have documentation of last night's events. Who is this? That's not important. What's important is that this documentation doesn't have to become public. There are a number of ways this situation could resolve quietly. Ways that would be beneficial to everyone involved. Daniel kept his voice completely flat. What do you want? We want Ms. Sinclair to consider stepping back from the board vote scheduled for next month. A medical leave of absence would be appropriate given the circumstances. Nothing permanent. Just long enough to allow certain restructuring decisions to proceed without complications. And if she doesn't, and a pause. Those photos reach every board member by noon, along with some additional material that paints a rather complete picture of the relationship between the operations director and his CEO. Another pause, letting it settle. We understand you have a son, Mr. Carter. Think about what a public scandal like this does to your career, your reputation, your custody situation. The line went dead. Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment with the phone in his hand. He was breathing evenly. His face was calm. Inside, something cold and very steady had settled into the place where anger would have been in a younger version of him. He walked back to the kitchen. We need to talk, he said to Victoria. Ethan looked between them. He had the instinctive social awareness of a child who had grown up learning to read the adults around him. I'm going to go get dressed, he said, picking up his bowl with great dignity and disappeared upstairs. Daniel sat down and told her about the call. He watched her listen, watched the still controlled expression she was wearing become something harder, not anger, something colder than anger. Medical leave, she said flatly when he finished. That's what they said. They need 30 days. The board vote on the Reeves acquisition is in 28. She pushed her coffee cup aside. If I step back, Marcus controls the proxy votes. The acquisition goes through. Reeves gets his board seat and Marcus gets... She stopped. Something happened behind her eyes. Marcus gets the controlling interest arrangement he's been negotiating for 18 months, the one I've been blocking. Tell me about Marcus, Daniel said. She looked at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was measured, but underneath the measurement was something he recognized: the particular exhaustion of someone who has been refusing to believe something true for a long time and is now finally being forced to look at it. Marcus Webb, she said. 15 years. We started this company together. I was the builder, he was the deal maker. That was always the arrangement. She paused. 18 months ago, he started bringing in Reeves. I thought it was just a capital play. We needed liquidity for the Singapore expansion. But the terms Reeves kept proposing, the board structure he wanted, it never made sense to me as a simple investment. It made sense as a takeover. And you told Marcus this? I told him I wasn't comfortable with the terms. Her voice stayed level. He said I was being too conservative, that I was letting personal risk aversion interfere with business judgment. A slight pause. He said variations of that to me for 15 years. Usually when he wants something, I won't give him. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Were you drugged at a dinner that Marcus organized at a venue Marcus chose with an investor Marcus brought to the company? She looked at him. The silence answered the question neither of them wanted to say out loud. I need to make a call, she said. To who? My attorney, and then the head of my personal security team, not the company security. Mine personally. She stood up. And I need to borrow those clothes for a while longer because I am not walking out of this house in last night's dress. He almost smiled again. He didn't. What do I do about the photos? He asked. Nothing yet, she said. Let them think they scared us. She looked at him directly. Did they? No, he said. Something passed between them. Not what had happened the night before, something different. Steadier. A recognition. Good, she said. Bye. By 9 a.m., her attorney was on the phone. By 9:30, a woman named Sasha, who ran Victoria's private security and looked like she could dismantle a small vehicle with her hands, had arrived at Daniel's house with a change of clothes and an expression that suggested she had been doing this kind of work long enough that nothing surprised her. By 10 o'clock, Daniel was at his laptop doing what he was good at, building a timeline. He had been operations director for 4 years. Before that, 12 years in the Army, the last 6 in logistics and intelligence support. He understood systems. He understood how pieces of information fit together. He understood that when something looks random, it usually isn't, and that the shape of a conspiracy is visible if you look at the gaps rather than the events. Or, he started with what he knew. The Reeves acquisition proposal 18 months ago. The board vote scheduled for 28 days from now. The investor dinner organized by Marcus at a venue with no public cameras. Victoria's drink. The gaps in her memory. The photographs taken from a staged position before she had decided where she was going. The early morning phone call with the specific ask medical leave, 30 days just enough to cover the vote. He wrote it all out, not on his work laptop, on a personal tablet disconnected from the company network. Then he started looking at Warren Reeves. What came back was interesting. Reeves had done 3 previous board acquisitions. All 3 had followed the same pattern: a period of negotiation, a personal scandal involving the primary blocker, a reshuffling of board control. All 3 of the companies were now under his umbrella. 2 of the principals who had originally opposed him had accepted quiet settlements and disappeared. 1 had tried to fight and lost everything in the process. This was not Warren Reeves's first time. Daniel's phone buzzed. Text from a number he knew: James Holloway, a VP of risk who he trusted, and who had been with the company since before Daniel arrived. The text said, "Have you seen your email this morning?" Daniel opened his company email. There were 43 new messages. The first was from the board's administrative coordinator, sent at 8:47 a.m., requesting that he and Victoria attend an emergency board meeting at 2 p.m. The next 4 were from board members he barely knew, with subject lines that contained the words concerning, professional conduct, and urgent review. Below those were a cascade of internal messages with a link to something, and he knew before he clicked it exactly what he was going to see. Then the photos, both of them. Victoria entering his house. Victoria getting into his car. With a brief narrative that was careful never to say directly that anything inappropriate had happened, but constructed every sentence to ensure that any reasonable person would conclude it had. It had been distributed at 8:15 a.m., 45 minutes after the phone call to him. They hadn't waited for his answer. They had already planned to release it regardless. Daniel sat with that for a moment. Then he called James Holloway. "Tell me what people are saying," he said. "It's bad," James said. His voice was low, slightly tense, in the way of someone who liked Daniel and didn't enjoy delivering this. "The framing is that you've been in a relationship with her for months. That your promotions were you-know. That the company's been mismanaged because she's emotionally compromised. Hartley is already calling for an emergency review." A pause. "Daniel, a lot of people who respect you are going to have a hard time knowing what to think right now." "I know," Daniel said. "James, I need a favor, completely off the record. I need the name of whoever handled the security camera installation in the residential units, the building management company services on Millbrook Drive, and I need the access log for camera system updates in the last 4 months." A long silence. "Daniel," James said carefully, "what exactly happened last night?" "She was drugged," Daniel said, "and someone knew she was going to call me before she did. I need to find out how." Another silence. Then, "I'll make some calls." "Thank you." He hung up and went to find Victoria. She was in the living room off her call with her attorney, standing with her phone in her hand, and an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not fear, not anger. Something that was both of those things underneath a layer of something that might have been grief, if grief were the word for what a person feels when they begin to understand that a betrayal they have been refusing to see has been real all along. "My attorney found something," she said. "Tell me." "Reeves's private equity firm, one of the entities in its capital structure." She looked at him. "Marcus is a silent partner. He has been for 11 months. The room was very quiet. "He's not just helping Reeves get a board seat," Daniel said. "No," Victoria said. "He's going to own 31% of the company we built together. He arranged a deal to sell his stake and position himself with the buyer, and he needed me out of the way long enough for the vote to go through." Her voice was very controlled. It was the kind of control that requires an enormous amount of effort. 15 years, she said. "And he never once?" She stopped. She pressed her lips together, looked away, looked back. "I'm going to that board meeting at 2 o'clock, she said. "So am I," Daniel said. "Daniel, you don't have to." "You didn't drug yourself," he said. "You didn't stage those photos. You didn't make that call to some random employee. You called me because you trusted me. And someone used that against you." He held her gaze. "I'm going to that meeting." She looked at him for a long moment. The way she looked at him was different from any way she had looked at him in 4 years of working together. Like she was seeing something she had noticed before, but had never let herself look at directly. "We don't have enough evidence yet," she said finally. "What we have is a theory. Reeves and Marcus will have lawyers in that room. If we go in with a theory and no proof, we lose." "I know," Daniel said. "We have 4 hours, so let's get to work." He sat back down at the table. She sat across from him. Sasha, at the counter with her coffee, pulled out her own laptop without being asked. Outside, the morning had turned clear and cold the way it does after a hard rain when the air is washed clean and everything looks sharper than it did the day before. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Webb was in his office, confident that by 2 o'clock, Victoria Sinclair's career would be over. He had 15 years of history with her, and he had spent 11 months engineering this moment with precision. What he had not accounted for was the man sitting across from Victoria at that kitchen table. The man who had spent 12 years in the United States Army, learning how to find the truth in the gaps between what people wanted you to see. The man who did not intend to let this go. The clock on the kitchen wall read 10:09 a.m. They had 3 hours and 51 minutes. The clock read 10:09 a.m. when Daniel opened the first file. By 10:24, he had built the skeleton of a timeline that made his stomach tighten in a way he hadn't felt since his last deployment. That specific sensation of understanding that the ground you're standing on has been mined, and has been mined for a long time, and the only reason you haven't stepped on anything yet is because someone was waiting for the right moment to detonate it. Victoria sat across from him and did not speak. She pulled her own laptop close and started moving through financial records with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 15 years learning to find the lie inside a spreadsheet. Sasha worked the counter, making calls in a voice so low it was practically subvocal, pulling threads that Daniel suspected he was better off not asking about directly. Ethan came downstairs at 10:31, dressed backpack on, looking between the 3 adults at his kitchen table, with the careful assessment of a child who understood that something serious was happening, and had decided the most useful thing he could do was not add to it. "Mrs. Henderson is taking me to school," he said to Daniel. "I know, buddy. I texted her." Daniel stood up, walked over, crouched down to his son's eye level. "You okay?" Ethan looked past him briefly at Victoria, then back. "Is she in trouble?" "We're working on it." Ethan considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old who took things seriously. Then he looked directly at Victoria and said, "My dad fixes things. He's really good at it." He said it simply as a statement of fact with the absolute confidence of someone who had watched it be true his whole life. Victoria looked at the boy. Something moved through her expression that she didn't fully manage to contain. "I'm starting to understand that," she said. Ethan nodded, satisfied, and walked out the front door. Daniel watched him go. Then he stood up, went back to the table and said, "All right, what do we have?" What they had by 11:15 a.m. was this. Marcus Webb had been a silent partner in Reeves Capital Partners for 11 months. The Ashford Club's head of events was a woman named Linda Cho, who had worked the private dining circuit for 12 years, and whose brother-in-law they discovered through Sasha's particular brand of background research was currently employed by one of Reeves's subsidiary companies. The security footage from the Ashford Club's exterior cameras for the previous evening had a 42-minute gap beginning at 10:47 p.m., exactly the window during which Victoria's memory went dark. And the building management company that had installed the security camera in Daniel's living room had been acquired 8 months ago by a holding company that traced back through 2 layers of shell entities to a real estate investment trust that Warren Reeves sat on the advisory board of. Daniel read that last one twice. "They put a camera in my house," he said. His voice was very quiet. Victoria looked up from her laptop. "Daniel, 8 months ago they installed a camera in my house." He wasn't angry. He was past anger. He was in the place soldiers go when they understand the full shape of what they're dealing with, a cold, very clear place where emotion becomes information and information becomes action. They knew. They picked me months ago. They knew she trusted me, and they put a camera in my house and they waited. They needed a specific person, Victoria said. Her voice was careful, watching him. Someone she would call. Someone whose reputation could be used. Someone with enough to lose that the threat would land. "Ethan," Daniel said. "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "Ethan." He sat with that for exactly 10 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called James Holloway. "The building management company on Millbrook Drive," he said when James picked up. "Who signed the installation authorization? I need the name on the work order." James was quiet for a moment. Daniel heard keyboard clicks. "It's going to take me a few minutes." "I have about 2.5 hours. Move fast." He hung up, looked at Victoria. "If we walk into that boardroom at 2 o'clock with what we have right now, what happens?" Damn, she was honest. Marcus and Reeves deny everything. Their lawyers call it circumstantial. The board suspends us both pending investigation, which accomplishes exactly what they needed. I'm out, the vote goes through, and by the time any investigation concludes, the acquisition is complete and legally irreversible. She paused. We need something they can't explain away. The work order, Daniel said. If that installation was authorized through a chain that connects to Reeves, that's not a business coincidence. That's premeditation. That's criminal. It's also a camera in a private residence that captured footage used for extortion, Victoria said. Her attorney instincts, or something close to them, had clearly been absorbing the structure of this. That's not a civil matter. That's federal. Which changes the room, Daniel said. Which changes the entire room, she agreed. At 11:48 a.m. James called back. The work order was signed by a property management supervisor named Glenn Ferris. But the authorization to expand the camera installation into residential units that came from corporate, from a directive issued by the company's regional director. A pause. The regional director's name is Anthony Marsh. Daniel Anthony Marsh spent 6 years at Reeves Capital Partners before joining the building management company. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. Send me everything you have. Document format. Don't use company email, use your personal address. Daniel, whatever you're doing. I know, he said. Thank you, James. He looked at Victoria. We have a chain. It's not complete, but it's enough to make the conversation different. Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen and went very still. It's Marcus, she said. The table went quiet. Sasha looked up from the counter. Daniel said nothing. Victoria looked at the phone for one more ring, and then she answered it and put it on speaker. Marcus, she said. Her voice was flawless. Calm, slightly neutral, the CEO voice. Not a crack in it. Victoria? His voice was warm. The warmth of a man who believed he had already won. I've been trying to reach you since this morning. I assume you've seen the situation. I've seen it. This is obviously very unfortunate. I want you to know that I've been doing what I can to manage the board's reaction. Hartley is pushing for an immediate review, but I've been arguing for a measured approach. A pause that was perfectly calculated to sound like concern. I think the best thing for you and for the company is if you take some time. Get ahead of this on your own terms. A voluntary step back is much better than a forced one. Victoria looked at Daniel across the table. He held up one finger. Keep him talking. What kind of timeline are you suggesting? She asked. A month, maybe 6 weeks. Smooth, practiced. Just until things settle down. I can hold the fort here. You know I've always had your back. I do know that, Victoria said. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember the first office we had, the one on Chambers Street? 3rd floor walk up, the elevator was broken for the first 8 months. A beat of silence. Of course I remember. You told me then that the 2 things you never do in business are betray a partner or lie to yourself about why you're doing something. Her voice was still perfectly level. I've been thinking about that a lot this morning. A longer silence. When Marcus spoke again, something underneath the warmth had shifted almost imperceptibly. Victoria, I think you should get some rest. You're not sounding like yourself. I'm sounding exactly like myself, she said. I'll see you at 2 o'clock, Marcus. She ended the call. The kitchen was silent for a moment. He knows we're not folding, Daniel said. Yes, she said. Which means we have about an hour before he starts making calls to shore up his position on the board. She looked at him. What do we still need? The medical angle, Daniel said. If she was drugged, we need documentation, not a theory, a test result. Victoria looked at Sasha. Sasha said, There's a private medical facility I use. Discretion is their entire business model. They can run a full tox panel and have results in 90 minutes if I call in a favor. Call it in, Victoria said. By 12:10 p.m., Victoria was in the back seat of Sasha's car heading for the medical facility, and Daniel was alone at his kitchen table with 4 open documents, a legal pad covered in handwritten notes, and a phone that kept buzzing with messages from board members, colleagues, and 2 journalists whose numbers he did not recognize and did not answer. He built the presentation the way he had once built mission briefings, clear, sequenced. Every claim backed by a document, a record, a name. He pulled Marcus's financial disclosures and cross-referenced them against the Reeves Capital Partnership timeline. He mapped the board vote schedule against the acquisition structure. He formatted the building management connection, Glenn Ferris, Anthony Marsh, Reeves Capital Partners, into a chain of authorization that a 12-year-old could follow. At 12:47, James Holloway texted him a scanned document that made Daniel set down his pen and breathe through his nose for a moment. It was the original work order for the camera installation, and in the section marked Special Instructions in typed text that someone had clearly not expected anyone to ever read carefully were the words, "Ensure Unit 1F living room coverage. Maintain remote access capability. Do not notify tenant." Do not notify tenant. And he photographed it, sent it to Victoria, sent it to his own personal email, sent it to a cloud account he hadn't used in 2 years. Victoria's response came back in 40 seconds. 3 words. That's the one. At 1:15 p.m. she was back. She walked through his front door with Sasha 2 steps behind her, and she had the tox panel results in her hand, and she set them on the table in front of him without a word. He read the relevant line. Gamma hydroxybutyrate, GHB. Consistent with administration approximately 4 to 6 hours prior to sample collection at a dose sufficient to produce memory impairment and emotional disinhibition without visible motor impairment. Someone had drugged her precisely enough to make her seem drunk without looking drunk, to compromise her judgment without making her fall down, to create a vulnerability that could be captured on camera and look to anyone watching the footage like a woman making a choice, rather than a woman whose ability to make choices had been chemically removed. Daniel put the paper down. He looked at Victoria. She was looking at the paper too. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were dry, but the way they were dry told him exactly how much effort that was costing her. "They took it from me," she said, very quietly. "The decision. They took it from me, and then they filmed what they'd created, and they were going to use it to end everything I've spent 15 years building." "Yes," Daniel said. She looked up at him. "I want to burn it down," she said. "I want to walk into that room and burn every single one of them to the ground." "You will," he said. "But controlled burn. On our terms." She breathed. Once. Twice. Then she straightened. "What's the sequence?" He walked her through it. The order in which he would present each piece. The moment he would introduce the talk's results. The point at which the building management chain would land hardest. She listened absorbed. It asked 3 precise questions and adjusted 2 elements of the sequence in ways that were better than what he had planned. They left the house at 1:35 p.m. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. sharp in the 32nd floor conference room that Victoria had designed herself when they moved into the building 4 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. A table that seated 22. A room built to project authority. In the elevator on the way up, Daniel looked at the floor numbers changing and thought about Ethan saying, "My dad fixes things." He's really good at it with that absolute, uncomplicated faith. And he thought about what it meant to deserve that faith. And he thought about the fact that 12 years of military service had not been the hardest thing he had ever done. Raising a son alone and staying a man worth looking up to had been harder every single day. He was going to be worth looking up to today. The elevator opened at 32. They walked out together. The assistant at the front desk looked up and went slightly wide-eyed because the word had clearly gone around the building by now. And seeing Victoria Sinclair walk off the elevator in the middle of what was supposed to be her career's final crisis Calm, straight-spined, with Daniel Carter 2 steps to her left and a leather portfolio under his arm was apparently not what anyone had expected. Marcus Webb was already in the conference room. Daniel could see him through the glass wall standing at the head of the table, talking to 2 board members, jacket perfectly pressed hands, moving in the smooth, confident gestures of a man who believes he is narrating his own victory. He looked up when Victoria pushed through the door. For exactly 1 second, something crossed his face. It was gone before it fully formed. But Daniel caught it because he was watching for it. It was surprise. He had not expected her to come, which meant that somewhere in Marcus Webb's careful calculation of this situation, there had been an assumption, a single load-bearing assumption, that Victoria Sinclair would do what people under extreme pressure usually do. She would run. She would protect herself. She would take the exit. He had not built his plan around the possibility that she would walk into the room. Victoria looked at Marcus for a long moment across the conference table. Then she pulled out her chair at the head of the table, her chair the one she had sat in at every board meeting for 9 years, and sat down. "Thank you all for coming," she said. Her voice was clear and steady, and carried to every corner of the room. "I have some things to share with this board before we discuss anything else. I'd ask for your undivided attention for the next 20 minutes. Marcus opened his mouth. "Sit down, Marcus," she said. Not loudly, not harshly. The way you say something to someone when you are completely done with pretending. He sat down. Daniel opened the portfolio. At 2:03 p.m., he began to lay the evidence on the table piece by piece in the order they had planned. The timeline, the financial records, the board vote schedule mapped against the acquisition structure. He spoke clearly without drama, the way he had learned to brief, because the most powerful thing you can do with the truth is present it plainly and let it do its own work. At 2:11 p.m., he put the building management work order on the table. The board member closest to him, a woman named Patricia Sohan, who had been with Sinclair Group since the beginning, leaned forward and read the special instructions line and looked up at Daniel with an expression that had shifted entirely. At 2:17 p.m., he placed the talks panel results in front of the board's medical liaison. The room changed. But it didn't change loudly. It changed the way rooms change, when something that everyone has been constructing an alternate explanation for suddenly becomes undeniable. It changed in the quality of the silence, in the way eyes moved away from Victoria and toward Marcus, in the way 2 board members who had come into the room ready to call for her resignation were now sitting very still and looking at the table. As Marcus said, "This is fabricated." His voice was still controlled, but the warmth was gone. "These documents are whoever produced this, whatever this is. It's not. The work order is on file with the city's commercial property registry," Daniel said. "The financial disclosures connecting you to Reeves Capital Partners are public record. The toxicology report was produced by a licensed medical facility whose records subpoena in 48 hours. He looked at Marcus directly. "Which document would you like to contest first?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had heard in a very long time. Victoria was watching Marcus. She had not looked away from him since he had spoken. She was watching him the way you watch something you have been carrying for 15 years finally reveal its true weight. "Marcus," she said, his name in her voice with 15 years inside it. "Did you think I wouldn't figure it out?" His jaw tightened. "Victoria, I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing here." "I have been thinking very carefully," she said. "For the last 4 hours, I have been thinking about nothing else." She leaned forward slightly. "You built a camera into a private citizen's home to manufacture a scandal. You drugged me. You used my trust our 15 years as the mechanism." She paused. "And you miscalculated in one very specific way." "Did I?" "You chose Daniel Carter," she said, "because you thought he was someone who would be frightened enough to stay quiet." She glanced at Daniel briefly, and something in the look was not professional at all, and then she was back to Marcus. "You picked the wrong person." Patricia Sohan said, I'd like to call for an immediate suspension of the board vote pending a full investigation. 2 other board members seconded it before she finished the sentence. Marcus Webb stood up. For a moment, he stood there, 15 years of a partnership and 11 months of betrayal all visible in his face at once. And then he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say, and he walked toward the door. He stopped when he reached Daniel. "This isn't over," Marcus said quietly. Daniel looked at him. "For her sake," he said, "I almost wish it weren't." Marcus left. The room began to move. Voices, phones. The board chair calling for order. Patricia Sohn already on a call with the company's legal team. The controlled chaos of a room where something enormous has just shifted on its axis. Victoria sat at the head of the table and did not move for a moment. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her face was composed. But Daniel, standing 3 feet away, could see the slight tremor in her right hand that she was working very hard to control. And he understood that the thing you don't see about people who are very strong is not that they don't feel things. It's that they feel everything, and they feel it alone. He sat down beside her. Not across the table. Beside her. She looked at him. "It's not over," she said. The echo of Marcus's words, but with different weight. Not a threat, an acknowledgement. "No," Daniel said. "But the worst part is..." She looked at her hands. Then she looked at the room, all the motion and voices, and the cascade of consequences beginning to unfold, and she took a single slow breath. "I built this company," she said, quietly, to herself as much as to him, like she was reminding herself of something she had momentarily lost track of. "Yes," Daniel said. "I'm not going to let anyone take it." "No," he said. "You're not." Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the city went on as it always did, indifferent and enormous, and full of people who would never know that on the 32nd floor of a building on Market Street, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of what was supposed to be the end, a woman had walked into a room she was expected to flee, and had absolutely refused to disappear. The board meeting officially adjourned at 3:47 p.m. By 4 p.m., the company's legal team had opened a formal investigation. By 4:15, Warren Reeves's attorneys had filed a preemptive statement with the SEC, claiming the acquisition process had been conducted in full compliance with securities law. By April 22nd, that statement had been leaked to 2 financial journalists, which told Daniel everything he needed to know about how prepared Reeves had been for this particular contingency. Prepared men with good lawyers were not the same as innocent men, but they were dangerous in ways that innocent men never were. Well, Victoria knew it too. He could see it in the way she moved through the aftermath of the meeting. Efficient, focused, managing the board members who needed managing, answering the legal team's questions precisely and without excess, never letting the room see the cost of what she was carrying. She was extraordinary at this. She had been extraordinary at this for 15 years. The problem with being extraordinary at holding things together was that it made everyone around you forget that you were also a person who could break. Daniel stayed close, not obtrusively. He positioned himself where he could be useful without being in the way, which was something he had learned in the Army, that the most effective support is the kind that doesn't announce itself. At 4:30 p.m., Patricia Sohn pulled him aside in the hallway outside the conference room. "You know what you did in there changes things for you," she said. Not unkindly. Patricia Sohn was 62 years old and had been on more corporate boards than Daniel had had assignments, and she said things the way people say things when they are done with soft landings. "You went up against a founding partner. You put evidence on the table that implicates people with significant institutional power. Some of those people have long memories." "I know that," Daniel said. "The investigation will protect Victoria," she said. "You, it will protect only if the evidence holds at every level. If there's one gap, one document that can be questioned, they will make it about you instead of about Marcus." "I understand." She studied him for a moment. "Why did you do it?" He thought about it honestly. Because she didn't drug herself, he said. And someone needed to say so in a room full of people who were prepared to act like she had. Patricia Sohn looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, the way people nod when they've heard the answer they needed to hear, and walked back into the conference room. Daniel leaned against the wall and took the first full breath he'd taken in 6 hours. His phone showed 14 missed calls, 9 text messages, and an email from HR requesting a meeting at his earliest convenience. He put the phone back in his pocket. He would deal with all of it. Just not in the next 3 minutes. Victoria appeared at his shoulder. Patricia talked to you. She did. What did she say? That I should be careful, he said. As Victoria was quiet for a moment. She's right. She looked at him. Daniel, the investigation is going to take months. The legal team is good, but Reeves has resources we don't. There will be pressure on you specifically. The narrative about us is already out there, and it doesn't go away just because we know the truth. I know. Your job, Victoria. He said it quietly, but she stopped. I'm not asking you to protect me. That's not what today was. She held his gaze. The hallway was empty for a moment, a brief gap between the movement of board members and legal staff, and the general controlled chaos of a company in crisis. In that gap, she looked at him the way she had looked at him at that kitchen table the night before, except without the chemical haze, without the fear, without the disorientation. Just clearly. Fully. Like she was seeing him without anything between them. I know what it was, she said, very quietly. Then her phone rang and the moment closed, and she was the CEO again. By 5:15 p.m., Daniel was back at his house. Ethan was home from school doing homework at the kitchen table with the focused frown he got when math was involved. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment and felt the particular relief of a space that was entirely separate from everything that had happened that day. Dad, Ethan said without looking up. Mrs. Henderson said there are things on the news about your work. Daniel sat down across from him. There are. Are you in trouble? A little bit, he said, but we're working on it. Ethan looked up from his homework. His eyes, which were his mother's eyes, and which Daniel could never look at without a particular complicated feeling, were very serious. Is it because of the lady this morning, Victoria? It's connected to that, yes. Ethan chewed on his pencil, which Daniel had told him not to do approximately 400 times. She seemed nice, he said. She actually listened when I talked about dinosaurs. Most adults just look like they're waiting for me to stop. Daniel smiled despite himself. She did listen. Is she okay? She's going to be, he said. Ethan nodded satisfied and went back to his homework. The simplicity of it. The homework, the pencil, the kitchen table, the ordinary domestic fact of his son trusting that things would be okay, because Daniel said so, hit him somewhere very specific in the place he kept the things he was most afraid of losing. He made Ethan dinner. He helped with the math. He read 2 chapters of the book they were working through together before lights out, and he sat on the edge of Ethan's bed for a few minutes after the way he always did, just being present in the dark room while his son's breathing slowed and evened out. He thought about what Patricia Sohn had said, about long memories and single gaps in evidence and the way power protects itself. He thought about the camera in his living room. 8 months of planning. Months before any of this started, someone had looked at his life, his house, his job, his son, his reputation, and had decided that all of it was a useful tool. That thought had a specific quality to it that was different from anger, colder, more permanent. He went downstairs, opened his laptop, kept working. At 7:40 p.m., Victoria called. Reeves's legal team made a move, she said. Her voice was controlled but clipped, which was her version of urgent. They filed an injunction attempting to freeze the investigation on the grounds that the evidence was obtained improperly. They're arguing that the talks panel was conducted outside normal chain of custody protocols. Daniel absorbed this. Can they make that stick? My attorney says probably not, but it buys them time, and they've done something else. A pause. They've reached out to 3 of our major institutional investors with a revised acquisition proposal. Better terms, faster timeline. They're trying to create enough board momentum to force a vote before the investigation concludes. How long before they have the votes? If they get Hartley, maybe 8 days. 8 days. He ran the numbers in his head. The investigation would take months. The injunction would take weeks to defeat. 8 days to stop a board vote that, if it went through, would make everything they had done that afternoon largely irrelevant. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need to get ahead of this publicly," she said. "The narrative is still out there. The photos, the story about us. As long as that's the story, I look compromised, and Reeves looks like a cleaner option to nervous investors." A pause. "I need to be the one who tells the truth first, before Reeves's version becomes the only version that people remember." "A press statement," he said. "More than that," she said. "I want to go on record, full statement. I want to acknowledge what happened at the dinner, what was done to me, and I want to address the photos directly. No euphemisms, no corporate language." Another pause. "I want to say that I was drugged, that I was filmed without my knowledge or consent, and that what appeared in those photos was a moment of vulnerability in a private home that was captured by a camera that had been installed specifically to manufacture this scandal." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You want to admit the kiss. I want to tell the truth about the kiss," she said. "Those are different things." He could hear her thinking the particular quality of silence that meant her mind was moving fast. "If I'm evasive about it, it looks like I'm hiding something. If I address it directly, say that something happened in a moment of extreme vulnerability, that Daniel Carter stopped it immediately, that nothing further occurred, it removes the weapon. You can't blackmail someone with something they've already told the truth about. It'll still damage you," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe people respond to honesty in ways we don't always predict." A beat. "I've spent 15 years being careful, being strategic, being exactly what every room needed me to be. Look where careful got me." He didn't have an answer for that, because she wasn't wrong. "There's something else," she said. Her voice changed, dropped slightly. "If I do this publicly, if I say what I need to say, it includes saying that I called you specifically because you were the one person I trusted. That's going to raise questions about us, about what we are to each other." The kitchen was very quiet. "What do you want to say?" he asked. "I want to say the truth," she said. "Which is that 4 years of working together built something between us that I don't have a corporate word for, and that what happened in your house last night was real, even if it happened under circumstances that were designed to be used against us." Another pause. "I also want to say that you are a man of absolute integrity, who stopped something that could have complicated both our lives significantly, and who then spent the next 14 hours putting everything on the line to help me anyway." Daniel sat with that for a long moment. "Victoria." "Yes." "I'm not a story you tell to win a press cycle." A silence. Then quietly, "No, you're not. I know that." Another pause. "I'm asking your permission to tell the truth about you, because it's your truth too, and you deserve to be asked." He exhaled. "Tell the truth," he said. "All of it." "Dan." The statement went out at 9 p.m. Victoria Sinclair's name on it. No PR polish, no legal softening. It said exactly what she had told him it would say. By 9:15, it had been picked up by 4 financial news outlets. By 9:45, it was on the front page of the Journal's digital edition. By 10:30, it had been shared 47,000 times. Daniel sat on his couch and watched the response come in through his phone, and thought about the particular strange sensation of having your private life become something that strangers have opinions about. And the responses split almost immediately. Half were supportive people who read the statement and responded to the honesty of it, the directness, the specific absence of spin. The other half were people who had already decided what the story was, and for whom no amount of truth was going to change the narrative they preferred. He put the phone down and did not look at it again that night. At 11 p.m., James Holloway texted, HR investigation into your conduct is suspended, pending outcome of formal board investigation. Patricia Sohn intervened. Then a second message. You have more allies in this building than you know. At 11:15, an unknown number texted a single sentence. You should have taken the deal, Marcus. Or someone close to Marcus. Daniel screenshot it, sent it to Victoria's attorney, and blocked the number. At 11:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after the call that had started all of this, his phone rang again. Victoria, I just got off a call with 3 institutional investors, she said. He could hear something different in her voice. Not relief exactly, something steadier than relief. They read the statement. 2 of them said they wanted to hear directly from me before making any decisions about the acquisition proposal. The third said, a pause. The third said that a CEO who tells the truth under pressure is the kind of leadership they want their capital behind. That's good, Daniel said. It might be enough, she said. If we can hold Hartley, if the investigation moves faster than Reeves expects, if... She stopped herself. There are a lot of ifs. There are always ifs, he said. A pause. How's Ethan? The question surprised him. Not that she asked it after today. After everything, it didn't surprise him that she thought of Ethan. It surprised him how naturally it arrived, how it fit into the space of the conversation, like it belonged there. Asleep, he said. He wanted me to tell you that Spinosaurus was also likely a better swimmer than T-Rex. She laughed. He had heard Victoria Sinclair laugh before, the polite laugh of business settings, the brief controlled laugh of someone who found something amusing without letting it slow them down. This was different. This was a real laugh, short and surprised, and entirely human, and it did something to the quality of the silence that followed it. Daniel, she said when the laugh had settled. Yeah. When this is over. She stopped, started again. When the investigation is concluded and the legal situation is resolved and we're standing on the other side of all of this, I would like to have a conversation. About what? About what we actually are to each other, she said. Without the crisis, without the professional structure, without any of the reasons it would be complicated. A beat. I want to have that conversation when there's nothing at stake except the truth. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street was quiet. The house was quiet. The same rain that had started everything 24 hours ago had long since stopped. I'd like that too, he said. He heard her exhale. A slow breath that carried something release maybe, or the first loosening of something she had been holding very tightly for a very long time. Get some sleep, she said. You too. She hung up.
Battle.
Daniel sat in the quiet of his living room for a long moment. He looked at the corner where the camera had been. Sasha had removed it that morning, bagged it as evidence. Just a small bracket hole in the plaster now barely visible. He thought about what it meant that someone had looked at his life and decided it was a lever. He thought about what it meant that the lever had not worked the way they planned. The investigation was going to be long. The legal fight was going to be ugly. Reeves and Marcus were not finished, because men with that much at stake and that many resources were never finished when they still had options. The next weeks were going to require everything he had: patience, precision, the willingness to stay steady when the pressure was designed to make him crack. But something had shifted. He had felt it in the boardroom. He had felt it in the way Patricia Sohn had looked at him in the hallway. He had felt it in James Holloway's text messages. He had felt it in the 47,000 shares of a statement that said the truth plainly and let it do its own work. Power protects itself. He knew that. He had always known that. But truth, when it is told cleanly and completely and without calculation, has a gravity of its own. And sometimes, not always, not easily, not without cost, that gravity is stronger. He turned off the kitchen light, checked the front door, walked upstairs, looked in on Ethan, still sleeping, still with one arm off the mattress, still the most important thing in his life, without even trying. He went to his room, lay down, did not stare at the ceiling. He was asleep in 4 minutes. 3 time zones away in a hotel suite in a city that did not know or care about any of this. Warren Reeves sat at a desk at midnight and read Victoria Sinclair's statement for the 3rd time, and for the first time in 11 months of careful planning, felt something he had not accounted for. Not fear, not yet. Matchy. Something closer to the recognition that the variable he had dismissed one operations director, a man of no particular institutional power, a single father with a modest house on Millbrook Drive, had turned out to be the only variable that mattered. He picked up his phone, dialed his attorney, said, "We need a new strategy." His attorney said, "What changed?" Reeves looked at the statement, at the line that said, without any equivocation, without any corporate softening, "Daniel Carter is a man of complete integrity, and I trusted him with the most vulnerable moment of my life, and he did not fail that trust." The story changed, Reeves said. What he meant was, the person he had built his plan around was not the person he had thought she was. And the person he had chosen as the weapon had turned out to be the shield. He had built a trap, and somehow in the process, he had handed both of them the key. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Marcus Webb resigned. He did not issue a statement. He did not hold a press conference. His attorney sent a single paragraph to the board's administrative coordinator at 6:47 on a Thursday morning, and by the time most of the company's employees arrived at their desks, 15 years of Marcus Webb's name on the wall of Sinclair Group's founding story had been quietly permanently erased. Warren Reeves withdrew the acquisition proposal 4 days later, citing what his legal team called material changes in the investment landscape, which was the kind of language that meant we lost, and we would prefer you not watch us lose. 2 executives who had been part of the dinner at the Ashford Club accepted negotiated departures. One cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for reduced personal liability and gave a signed statement that confirmed everything Daniel had laid out on the board table 3 weeks earlier, including the specific conversation in which Marcus had outlined what the evening was supposed to accomplish. The investigation was not over. These things were never over quickly. But the shape of it had changed in the way that shapes change when the truth has been established, and what remains is only the long, grinding work of consequence. Daniel knew all of this because Victoria told him in the brief, precise updates she sent at the end of each day. Not long messages, never emotional in their surface, but always with something underneath them that said more than the words did. He read them the way he had learned to read her, not just what was said, but the space around it. On the morning of the 26th day, he received a different kind of message. It said, "Ethan's school concert is tonight. You mentioned it last week. I'd like to come if that's still something you'd be open to, only if it makes sense. I understand if it doesn't." He read it twice. He noticed she had said, "if it makes sense" twice, which was the kind of repetition that happened when someone was more uncertain than they were letting on. He typed back, 7 o'clock. "I'll save you a seat." Her response was 2 words. "Thank you." He stared at those 2 words for longer than was strictly necessary. Ethan's school held the concert in the gymnasium, which smelled like floor wax and the particular energetic chaos of 200 children in various states of pre-performance anxiety. Daniel sat in the 3rd row because Ethan had specified the 3rd row something about sightlines and the position of the risers that his son had explained with the seriousness of a military logistics briefing. He had saved the seat to his left. Victoria arrived at 6:53. She came in through the side door, not the main entrance. He noticed that the choice to avoid the main door, where more people would see her arrive, the instinct toward discretion that was so deeply embedded in her that it operated even in a school gymnasium. She was in a simple dark jacket and slacks, no jewelry except small earrings. And she looked nothing like the CEO on the cover of 3 business magazines, and everything like a person who was trying very hard to show up as just a person. She sat down beside him. "I wasn't sure I should come," she said quietly, looking straight ahead at the risers where the children were assembling. "I know," he said. "I'm glad you did." She didn't look at him, but something in her posture, something very slight, settled. The concert began. Daniel watched his son find the third row from the stage and lock eyes with him, and the grin Ethan produced was the specific grin of a child who has been told that showing off is undignified and is going to show off anyway. Then Ethan's eyes moved one seat to the left. His grin widened in a way that was almost imperceptibly different, more surprised, maybe more pleased. He gave a small nod, the way 8-year-olds nod when they are trying to look cool and are not succeeding. Beside Daniel, Victoria made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. "He saw me," she said. "He definitely saw you," Daniel said. They were quiet through the first song. Midway through the second, Victoria leaned slightly toward him and said under her breath, "He's the one in the blue shirt who keeps looking over here to make sure I'm paying attention." "That's him," Daniel confirmed. "I am paying attention," she said. A pause. "He's quite good. Don't tell him that, or he'll talk about it for 6 weeks." She made that almost laugh sound again, and Daniel felt in the warm, slightly too bright gymnasium with its floor wax smell and the slightly off-key rendition of a song he half recognized, something he had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than happiness, something that did not announce itself. The specific feeling of being exactly where you are supposed to be. After the concert, Ethan came off the risers and made a beeline for them with the single-minded focus of a child who had a specific agenda. He stopped in front of Victoria and said without preamble, "You came." "I said I might," she said. "You said maybe," Ethan corrected, with the pedantic accuracy of a child who tracks these distinctions carefully. "Maybe isn't the same as I'll be there." "You're right," she said. "It isn't." She looked at him directly, the same focused attention she had given his dinosaur explanation 3 weeks ago. "I'm glad I came." Ethan assessed this. Then he said, "We're getting pizza. My dad always gets pizza after concerts. You should come." Daniel said, "Ethan, it's okay," Victoria said. She glanced at Daniel, and the question in her eyes was also a small amount of hope, which was something he had never seen in her eyes in a boardroom in 4 years. If that's all right. They got pizza. A corner table at the place 3 blocks from the school that Ethan considered sacred ground because it had been his and Daniel's place for 2 years, and the fact that he was willing to share it was not lost on Daniel at all. Ethan talked. He talked about the concert and the song they had practiced for 6 weeks, and the kid next to him who had knocked over a music stand during rehearsal, and the Spinosaurus documentary he had watched twice that week. Victoria listened. She asked the right questions in the right places, and once she was wrong about something, she said she thought the Spinosaurus lived in North America, and Ethan corrected her with the patient authority of a subject matter expert. And she received the correction with such genuine interest that Ethan looked briefly like someone had handed him a gift. At one point, Ethan said very casually, the way children say the things they have actually been thinking about very carefully, "Do you have any kids?" Victoria's expression moved in a way she didn't entirely manage to control. Something honest and quick there and gone. "No," she said. "I don't." "Did you want to?" Ethan asked. "Ethan," Daniel said. "It's okay," Victoria said. Again. She looked at Ethan. "I told myself for a long time that I didn't," she said. "I'm not sure that was entirely true." Ethan considered this with the gravity he brought to important things. Then he said, "My mom died when I was 1, so I don't remember her. But Dad does a pretty good job." He said it simply as information without sadness, the way children talk about the shape of their lives when the shape has always been what it is. "I think it would be okay if there was someone else around sometimes." The table was quiet. Daniel looked at his son. Ethan was already turning back to his pizza, The observation made the opinion registered, moving on with the ease of someone who had said what he meant and didn't feel the need to do anything else with it. Victoria looked down at the table for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, but only just, and the effort of keeping them that way was visible in a way she was not trying to hide. She looked at Daniel. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. That was... He realized later the moment the thing between them stopped being something he was carefully not examining and became something real. 2 weeks after that, Daniel was called into Patricia Soan's office. Betsy. He had been in Patricia's office 3 times in 4 years. Once when he was hired, once when he was promoted to operations director, once the morning after the board meeting when she had told him quietly in the hallway that what he had done had changed things. He sat across from her and waited. She said, "The investigation has produced enough evidence to refer the matter to federal prosecutors. Reeves's team is in settlement negotiations. The board has voted to proceed with a restructuring of the executive leadership team." She paused. "We are creating a new position, Chief Operating Officer. It is not a promotion out of courtesy. It is a position the company needs, and you are the person we have identified as most qualified to hold it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "And Victoria?" "Victoria is CEO," Patricia said with a slight edge that suggested the question had been unnecessary. "She will remain CEO. She is, in my considered opinion, after 30 years of watching corporate leadership, one of the 2 or 3 finest operational minds I have encountered. What happened 6 weeks ago was an attempt to destroy something genuinely rare." She looked at him steadily. "We are not going to let that succeed." "The COO position," Daniel said. "Does it change our reporting structure?" Patricia looked at him with the expression of a woman who has seen many things and found most of them less surprising than people hoped. "It does," she said. "You would report directly to the board, not to Victoria." He understood what that meant. He had understood what it would mean 6 weeks ago, the night she had called him from the rain. "I accept," he said. Patricia nodded once. "Good." He was at the elevator when his phone buzzed. "Victoria, a text Patricia told me. I wanted you to hear it from her first. I hope that was right." He typed back, "It was right." A pause, then dinner. "This weekend. No crisis, no lawyers, no board members, just dinner. You and Ethan if he wants to come." He typed, "He'll want to come. He's been asking about you." Another pause longer this time. "Then I've been thinking about him too." He put his phone in his pocket and got in the elevator and did not try to hold back the thing he was feeling because it was a good thing, and good things deserve to be felt fully. The dinner was at his house. Victoria arrived with grocery bags, which surprised him. He had assumed restaurant neutral ground the careful formality of early things. Instead, she arrived with grocery bags and said, "I looked up what 8-year-olds typically like, and then I called Ethan's school to confirm," which was such a Victoria Sinclair approach to the situation that he had to turn away to keep from laughing. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs and said, "Did you bring the stuff for pasta?" with the urgency of someone whose sources had briefed him in advance. "I did," Victoria said. Ethan descended the stairs with great dignity. "I'll show you where everything is," he said, and walked past Daniel into the kitchen, as if this had been his idea all along. Daniel stood in his own entryway and watched Victoria Sinclair follow his 8-year-old son into his kitchen, and thought that there were things in a life that you did not plan, could not have planned, that arrived through a rainy night and a phone call, and a series of events that were designed to destroy something and instead built it. Nay, they cooked dinner together, all 3 of them. Ethan was in charge of the garlic bread, a responsibility he took more seriously than most adults took their jobs. Victoria made the sauce from scratch, with the focused intensity of someone who had clearly practiced this recently and was not going to admit it. Daniel stood at the counter and was mostly in the way, and didn't mind. Boy. At one point, Ethan looked up from the garlic bread and said entirely casually, "This is good, right? The 3 of us doing this." Daniel said, "Yeah, buddy, it is." Ethan looked at Victoria. She was looking at the sauce, and her expression was the expression of someone who has spent a long time being alone and is only now standing in someone else's kitchen on a Saturday evening with garlic bread happening 3 feet away, beginning to understand what they were missing. "Victoria," Ethan said. She looked up. "Is it good for you too?" She held his gaze for a moment. The boy with his garlic bread and his complete unguarded directness asking the question that adults spend years finding elaborate ways to avoid. "Yes," she said, quietly, completely. "It's very good for me too." They ate at the kitchen table. Ethan talked about a field trip that was coming up and a science project involving volcanoes, and what he had determined was the definitive ranking of every dinosaur by overall usefulness in a survival scenario. Victoria offered counter-arguments with the seriousness the topic deserved. Daniel ate his pasta and listened to the two of them argue about whether a Triceratops or an Ankylosaurus would be more useful as a companion in a crisis, and thought this is the thing. After dinner, after Ethan had gone to bed without being asked twice, which Daniel noted was a first, he and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with coffee, the way they had sat at this table 6 weeks ago, except that everything was different. No crisis, no timeline, no evidence to build. Just coffee and the quiet of a house with a sleeping child upstairs, and the particular quality of silence between two people who have been through something together and come out the other side. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. He waited. "The night I called you," she said, "I told you it was because you were the only person I trusted." She looked at her coffee cup. "That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." "Tell me the whole truth," he said. She looked up at him. "I called you because for 4 years I had been watching you do everything right. Not perfectly, you are not a perfect person. But right. The way you talk to people, the way you handled the things that went sideways, the way you left the office at 6 o'clock because Ethan had a thing, without apology, without performance, just because that was what you did." She paused. "I had spent 15 years surrounded by people who would do anything to win. And you were just trying to do things right. I didn't know how much I needed to be near that until I was standing outside in the rain, and I realized the only person I wanted to call was you." Daniel sat with that. "Victoria," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it's complicated. I know the timing is. I know there are things we would have to figure out. Slowly, carefully, for Ethan's sake as much as anything." She met his eyes. "But I'm not interested in careful anymore. I'm interested in true." He reached across the table, not dramatically, just put his hand over hers the way he had wanted to do the night she had said he was a good man, and he had told himself that was a line he wouldn't cross. There was no camera in the corner now. No one waiting across the street. No agenda, no conspiracy, no 12-layer plan designed by someone who had underestimated both of them. Just two people at a kitchen table on the other side of something that had tried to break them. "True works for me," he said. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a long time in the quiet kitchen while the coffee went cold and the clock moved without hurry. And upstairs, a boy who had told a woman he barely knew that she seemed nice slept with one arm off the mattress and his stuffed dog tucked under his chin, completely unaware that the things he had said simply and honestly over pizza and pasta and garlic bread had done more than 6 weeks of investigations and board meetings and legal filings to build the thing that was now quietly and without fanfare beginning. Months later, the federal case concluded. Reeves settled. Marcus accepted a plea arrangement that included permanent exclusion from serving in any executive or board capacity. The Sinclair Group's stock recovered and then exceeded its previous high. Victoria was named to a national list of the most effective CEOs in the country, which she received with the brief controlled acknowledgement of someone who had long since stopped needing external confirmation of things she already knew. Yay. Daniel was named Chief Operating Officer in a press release that ran on a Tuesday, and was notable primarily for being boring, which he considered a significant improvement over the last time his name had appeared in the company news. Ethan decided that the Ankylosaurus was definitively superior to the Triceratops, published his reasoning in a handwritten document he titled The Final Answer, and presented a copy to Victoria at dinner on a Thursday evening with the gravity of someone releasing a landmark scientific paper. Victoria read every word of it. She asked 2 follow-up questions. She told him she had been convinced. Ethan beamed the same way he had beamed from the risers at the concert the night this had really begun, when he had looked to the 3rd row and found his father, and found 1 seat to the left. A woman who had shown up when she didn't have to, because showing up was the kind of person she was choosing to become. Some things begin in the worst possible way, in a rainy night and a terrified phone call and a plot designed to destroy 2 people who had never done anything to deserve it. They begin in vulnerability and fear and the specific cruelty of people who have mistaken power for the right to use other people's lives as instruments. And sometimes, despite all of that, because of the people who choose integrity when no one is watching, who tell the truth when lying would be easier, who show up in the rain and stay through the aftermath and sit across a kitchen table at midnight and refuse to let a good thing be reduced to a scandal. Sometimes, those things become the best thing that ever happened. Victoria Sinclair had spent 15 years building an empire. She had done it with intelligence and will and a ferocity of focus that had cost her things she had told herself she didn't want. She had been wrong about what she wanted. Daniel Carter had spent 7 years building a home. He had done it imperfectly with too many dishes in the drying rack and math homework at the kitchen table, and a son who asked the questions adults were afraid to ask and trusted the answers he received. He had built something worth having. And on a quiet evening, in a house on Millbrook Drive with pasta on the stove and garlic bread in the oven, and the sound of an 8-year-old explaining the definitive hierarchy of prehistoric survival to a woman who was listening like it was the most important briefing she had ever attended, all of it came together. Not with a dramatic declaration, not with a perfect moment. With dinner, with honesty, with a child who looked at a lonely woman and saw her clearly, and a man who had spent 7 years learning that integrity is not what you perform. When people are watching it, is what you do when the camera is off, when the room is empty, when no one will ever know but you. That was the story, and this was how it ended. Not in a boardroom, not in a headline, not in a verdict, but at a kitchen table with coffee. Going cold and a hand held in the dark. 2 people who had been through the fire, choosing without hesitation, without reservation, to stay.